Hi, it's Carol Rickard, and welcome to How to Tame Your COVID Stress Monster. I'm just going to give people a minute to jump on this webinar, and glad if you're joining us on Facebook Live or you've actually joined us through Zoom. Either way, I'm just really glad you're here and excited to be able to share some of these tools with you so you can have a little bit more peace, sleep better at night. And yeah, so let's tell you what, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to jump right in. And here's what we're going to do is we're going to first take a look at what I want to share with you all during this webinar. And so what we're going to look at is how stress is impacting you. We're going to look at why stress management doesn't work. I'm going to share the 3 steps that you must take if you want to succeed. And the other thing I'm going to do is introduce you to how 60-second solutions work. So, are you ready? Great. I want you to write this down. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And that is a quote by Henry Ford. Let me say that again. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And I want to give you all an example of this quote put into action. So how many people know of Yosemite National Park? Well, it's actually located in California, and I happened to grow up right outside Yosemite at a place called Bass Lake. And I was spoiled growing up. And as you can see on the picture on the side, it's beautiful growing up there. Well, turns out that 10 years ago, I went back on a family vacation, and it was sort of a reunion, and I decided that I was going to climb Half Dome. Now, here's the reason why. I live in New Jersey now, and I had a girlfriend from New Jersey who had done it. And I wasn't about to let a Jersey girl do something that I, who grew up right outside of there, didn't do. So I decided, okay, that's it. I'm going to get in shape, and we're going to do it. And I invited my nieces and my nephew, who said yes. And so we started out down at here in the valley at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you have to hike about 4,000 elevation to get around back to here. We got here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, back here is the important part because this is the climb. In fact, here's a little bit better picture. You can see that you actually have to pull yourself up the cables up the backside. Now, my brother and I got separated from my 2 nieces who were about 20 years younger than us and could move faster than us. And he and I got to this point, and I looked at him and I saw my niece's pink shirt up there, and I just said, you know what, Tony, I want to go to the top, but I'm feeling pretty proud of just what we did and accomplished already. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you know what, I'm with you. Let's just wait till they come back down. So we were thinking we can't. Turns out that wasn't my nieces at all up there in the pink shirt. They somehow were behind us. And then what happened is they were like, come on, Aunt Carol and Uncle Tony, come on, we got to go do this. Let's go. And the people coming off of having climbed up there, because you come down the exact same way you go up, they were just, well, they were high. I mean, they were just like so encouraging. And that got us thinking we can, and we did. And no, that is not my brother out there. I wouldn't let anybody get that close to the edge because, believe it or not, I am afraid of heights. This is my brother back down at the bottom. In fact, he'd probably be pissed if he knew that I was sharing everybody's photo. So don't be mad, Tony, in case you're watching. But the only thing that changed for us was our thinking, whether we can't or we can. And so you want to be careful what you're thinking. Now, before we go any further, there are a bunch of people that know who I am, but there are other people joining me that don't know who I am. So I'd like to just take a few moments to tell you a little bit about myself and why you want to listen to what I have to say. Turns out I've been teaching stress management in hospital settings since 1991. And over that time, I've trained thousands of people to take control of their stress using an approach I developed called stressometry, which you're going to learn today. Because of my experience, I've been a featured stress expert on a number of different magazines and media. I've written a number of books over the years, and I've had the great opportunity to do some training for some really wonderful organizations. But most importantly, I want you to listen to what I'm sharing today because I live what I teach. Everything that I tell you today, I put into practice in my own life. Now, that wasn't always the case. When I started almost 20 years ago at the hospital where I work now, I wasn't doing that. In fact, I loved my job, but after 8 months on the job, 3 weeks in a row, I ended up with migraines. I went in to see my doctor every week, and on the third week, he asked me, Carol, what's got you so stressed out? And I realized in that moment that I wasn't using what I was teaching. And I had a really good excuse. My excuse was I'm too busy, right? When you work in a hospital setting, and especially these days, there's not even time to breathe. But at my work 20 years ago, it was just such a fast-paced environment that I had to eat my lunch at my desk, usually as I was writing out patients' notes or, in between phone calls. And I loved my job, and I knew that other hospitals would be just as stressful. So I knew changing jobs wasn't going to be the answer. So instead, I decided to put into practice what I was teaching. And I can say this, ever since, that I live what I teach and I teach what I live every single day. And so what I share with you all today are things that I actually put into practice every day of my life. Now, the game changer for me, though, came on October 9th of last year. And I was diagnosed with uterine cancer. And I have to be honest with you all, it was this crashing tidal wave. But through it, I held on to the feeling of gratitude, because what I realized in that moment was, at least now I knew about the cancer and we could treat it. But if I'd never gone to the doctors, then I would have never known about the cancer. And who knows? It could have just killed me without me ever knowing it. But it challenged me to up my game. I was lucky because I've been living these tools every day. But I had to come up with a few new tools, and they're really appropriate to the times that we live in now. And the biggest tool that I had to develop was for what I call what if alley, right? When you start asking yourself these questions, well, what if I don't go back to work? Or what if they don't have me come back? Or what if I get the coronavirus? Or what if this? For me, it was actually before surgery that I had in November. And it was, well, what if I don't come out of this alive? What if, and then I would catch myself even sitting right here at my desk and think, what if somebody else has to clean up my desk? And so I realized, because here's the thing, the difference between planning, all right, and then projecting is that our feelings stay in the present. So I knew that what I needed to do was I needed to plan. Yes, I needed to make sure that I had a will and a living will, but I didn't want to get lost in the emotion. And I'm afraid that's what a lot of people are doing now, because this is a pretty, kind of once in a lifetime thing. And so what I wanted to do was come up with tools that I needed to keep me from getting lost in the what if alley. So the first tool I came up with is what I call my now stone. And what my now stone was, is I went and I picked up a stone in my yard, just a little one about that size, actually a little littler than that one. And I had somebody take a Dremel and engrave the word now on it, right? And then I carried it in my pocket everywhere, whether I went to work, whether it didn't matter where I was, this stone was always in my pocket, because as soon as I touched it, I could anchor myself in the now. And what now stands for is to notice only what is. And so now means notice only what is around you. So it keeps you anchored in the present. Now, I don't have the stone to show to you all, because I had a guardian angel who was somebody who had stage 4 lung cancer, and she ended up having a PET scan done, and she was really nervous. Her 5-year PET scan, waiting on the results, and I kind of gave her the stone, and I said, "Here, you need this right now. Just keep it on you all the time, and when you hold it, just remember to be here in the present." But the other tool I came up with was something simply that I could just do in a split second. And what I would say to myself is, feel your feet. And as soon as I could say, feel your feet, I would feel my feet. And guess where my feet are? They're connected to the ground. And so it just became another great way of anchoring myself here in the present rather than getting lost in what if alley. So I hope you can use those tools, because I'm just afraid there are a lot of people, that are kind of getting lost in that what if alley. And I know, because for me, that started back in October and November, not here in March and April. So life before this whole pandemic, well, it was pretty stressful. In fact, it was at epidemic levels when it comes to stress, right? And every year, the American Psychological Association does a report here in the United States. And in one of them, they a couple years ago, they surveyed people. And here's what they found out. 77% of people said they regularly experience physical symptoms caused by stress. 54% said it causes them to fight with those they love. Now, this is one I think under today's circumstances is probably more up like the 77%, right? Just with all the stress that people are having being quarantined at home. 76% identified money and work as their leading cause of stress. And 48% of people said stress had a negative impact on their lives. And, what does this all mean? Well, it means that stress is a huge problem. And because with the coronavirus, it's an even bigger problem right now, which is why I wanted to do something to be able to help. So my question to you is, how is stress impacting you? So I want you to pay attention and see if any of these sound familiar. Are you so stressed out these days that you can't sleep? Or you fall asleep, but then you wake up and you can't go back to sleep? Well, I have a great tool that I'm going to share with you later on, all right, that can actually help with this specific problem. Or is your stress spilling out on the wrong people? And are you experiencing any anxiety or depression? How about this? Are the littlest things starting to get to you? And lastly, do you notice that you're starting to have health issues? Now, stress affects our health one of two ways, all right? One way is that it takes a health issue that you already have and makes it bigger. So if you're somebody who's living with asthma or diabetes or high blood pressure, and you add the stress of the quarantine or being laid off, you just add the stress of today on top of that, it's going to magnify that existing condition, just like it did for me with the migraines. I'd had migraines all my life. It was just the stress, was what got them to happen 3 weeks in a row. But the second way stress can kind of hurt our health is that it can literally make us sick. I can remember having a job that was really pretty stressful and very toxic. And I had 2 coworkers who were going back and forth to the doctors because they were having stomach issues. And my one coworker eventually got another job. And guess what happened? All the stomach issues went away. Besides, the medical tests all came back showing nothing. So she had a kind of a good idea that it was stress, but that's the power of stress when it's in control. And in fact, if you said yes to any of those things, that's the sign that stress has taken control of your life. And the chances are that you've been home and you've been trying to do some things to manage your stress, but that no matter what you've done, it still doesn't help, or it doesn't help enough. And that's because what we've been taught is all wrong. I discovered this. So let me explain. You see, when I would get stressed out at 10 o'clock in the morning, back on my job, 20 years ago, if I did just stress management, that meant going to the gym at 6 o'clock at night. Or even better, maybe I could go for a massage instead. But the problem was that my migraine would hit me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I could never make it to those activities because the stress had already knocked me on my feet before that. So what I discovered was that stress management is not enough. So let me explain. If you think of a coin, stress really has two sides to it. All right, just like a coin has two sides. There's prevention, the side of stress, but then there's the intervention side of stress. Prevention is what we've been taught all our lives. That's the stress management piece. But what I was teaching my patients was interventions and what I call stressometry. Now, what is stressometry? Well, it's really pretty simple. It means that when you get stressed out at 10 o'clock in the morning, you're being able to take action right then to reduce your stress so that you don't have to wait until noon to go out for a walk on your lunch hour, if in fact you can do that. All right. So instead of me, getting the migraines at 2 o'clock, when I would get stressed out at 10 o'clock, here's what I would do instead. I would do 60 seconds in my office of listening to some calming music. Then I would do 60 seconds on my heavy bag. And sometimes I didn't even have 60 seconds. Sometimes it was just 30 seconds. And the truth is, even 15 seconds. The point being is that something is better than nothing. But when I could do 60 and 60, guess what? Migraine avoided, and it was only 10:02. And that's the system that I'm going to share with you as we kind of move along through this program, all right? So that's really how, in a nutshell, how stressometry works. And you're going to learn a little bit more about it as we go, because my goal for this program is to have you walk away with tools that you can use as interventions in your own life, so that you're not just practicing stress management, but you're you're not just practicing stress management, but you can also practice stressometry. So here's the thing. If you got any questions, now would be the time to either put them into the Q&A box if you're on Zoom, or even into the Facebook page if you're watching through Facebook. And I promise that I will, when we're done with this, before I close everything down, I'll take a look through the questions and be able to answer what everybody's got, okay? But I just don't want to make you wait till the end to ask your questions. So this way, if you have a critical question about stressometry or what I just said, you can, you don't lose it. So that brings us to the 3 steps that you must take in order to have success. And that starts with step 1, which is stop using the wrong tools. Step number 2, which is become a stress detective. And step number 3, which is start using the right tools. So let's jump right in to stop using the wrong tools. So I have a question for you. Have you ever taken one of these, a knife, and used it as one of these, a screwdriver, right? Yeah, just about everybody has, right? When I ask that in a live workshop, everybody's hands kind of go up. And what about this? How many things have you used duct tape for? There is that book, 1001 Ways to Use Duct Tape. Well, these have been some of my uses. I always had a roll on my desk at work. It makes a great lint brush because it's more sticky than those other things. And when I was in college, I had to use it as a radiator fix for a couple months until I could afford to get the right part for the car. But the knife and the duct tape are examples of what I call temporary solutions, right? You use them, but then you gotta go back and you gotta have the right tool, or you gotta go back and do it again, with another temporary solution. And temporary solutions, when it comes to stress, are the wrong tools. And just like we can use duct tape and the screwdriver as temporary solutions, we can use these same temporary solutions when it comes to stress. In fact, people think they're doing something about their stress when they're actually not. And I want to share a personal example with you, all right? And that is this. Now, I'm not talking about going out after work with the coworkers and having a beer or a glass of wine. I'm talking about the fact that I was 14 years old at the time. And what had happened was I overheard a conversation and I figured out that my dad was dying from cancer. Now, I grew up in one of those homes where we didn't talk about things. So guess what I didn't do? I never told anybody what I heard. Instead, I started stealing a lot of alcohol from my parents. I even took it to school. I remember taking a 6-pack of Coors Light in my blue Adidas bag and putting it in my locker and then sneaking out during the day to drink it with a couple friends. And you want to know the worst part about this? I hated the taste of alcohol, but it was the solution to keep me from feeling overwhelmed by the fact that my dad was going to die. Now, I was very lucky because it didn't stay my tool, all right? Actually, basketball season rolled around. I won an award at the end of the year, and I decided maybe I could use this to go to college. So I stopped drinking and I just stuck with the basketball. But I want to share another example, all right? Now, one other point. Over the 30 years I've worked in hospital settings, I've helped a lot of people who they started out with these tools when they were young kids, but then when they get into their 30s and their 40s and their 50s, they're still using them. And that isn't anything to be ashamed of. It's just getting the right tools for the job, and just people never had the chance to learn. And I was fortunate because I didn't have to go down that path. One other person though, it plays a great example, and that is Oprah, right? Oprah's weight, like she did this with her weight. It went up and it went down. And if you watched her for a number of years, the only time Oprah had success with her weight was when she realized that she was using food as a tool. And for her, it went back to when she was a little girl and experienced the trauma in her life. Now, here's some other wrong tools that people can use. Shopping or spending, eating food, using substances. I talked about alcohol, but it could be using other drugs or even marijuana. Smoking more if you're a smoker, caretaking, which I'll come back to in a minute, work, cell phones, arguing, actually avoiding, and complaining. Now, let me come back to caretaking, because caretaking is in red because sometimes people can be so busy taking care of other people's problems that they don't have to take care of their own, all right? So here's the thing. Doing these some of the time or a little bit of the time, that's not a problem. Only you will know if you are using any of these things listed to completely avoid what's going on in your life. And I can't tell you what you're doing is wrong, but I want you to recognize any of them and be willing to kind of swap out the wrong tools for the right tools. Now, I want you to be careful because I don't want you to replace one wrong tool with another wrong tool. And here's an example. Know anybody that was a smoker? They stopped smoking, and what happened? Yeah, they gained weight, right? So ultimately, the wrong tools can go on to create more stress in your life. So that brings us to the end of step 1, which is to stop using the wrong tools. Moving into step number 2, that is to become a stress detective. And so I have a bottle of root beer right here with me, all right? And I want to just kind of shake it up and shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it. All right, so you all can see that I put a little bit of foam in there, right? Well, what happened is the pressure built up inside of that bottle. And I like to teach people that we're kind of like root beer bottles, all right? That what happens is life happens to us and it shakes us up. And the pressure builds up inside of us to the point where it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And almost, I mean, at this point, you open your mouth, you say things that you can't take back. All right. And unlike a bottle of root beer, we can only hold so much. So that means it either explodes and it spills out on the wrong people, or it implodes and it makes people sick. And believe it or not, I have a bottle that I want to show you all. It's a little hard to see on the camera usually, but it basically has imploded on itself. And what happened was I took a bottle of root beer from my live workshops. It stopped foaming, and I put it in my garage for 4 months. When I went out 4 months later, I realized that the bottle had started to concave in on itself. And so I discovered that bottles can kind of implode as well. So we can look at the foam. Being a stress detective is when you start to recognize when that pressure is starting to build up inside of you. All right. And there's a couple things that you can watch out for. There are 3 main areas that stress kind of shows itself in our lives. One is physical, and that's what our body does. The other is emotional, and that's what you're feeling. And lastly is behavioral, and that's what you do. And so let me give you some examples of each of these, all right? Because this is really what you want to start to pay attention to. First is physical, and that is, what is your body doing? For me, those migraines were the sign that I wasn't very well managing my stress. But it could be sleep. It could be just something to do with your muscles. The most important part about physical is that it's all things that your body does that you can't stop. All right. The middle is the feelings. And again, these lists aren't like limited to just what I'm putting, but it's just to give you an idea to get your brain sort of thinking like that. And lastly, there's what you do. Do you yell or scream, or do you become quiet? Are you the person that sort of shuts down, or are you eating more right now? All of these things, you might be doing right now more in your life because you've been trapped at home and not been able to really kind of engage in life. Make sense? Good. So, has this ever happened to you though? Have you ever been going away on vacation? You go to sleep the night before after you get everything packed up, and guess what? You can't sleep, right? Well, nobody in their right mind is going to purposely stay up all night before vacation and you have to get up early and catch a flight. I have some bad news. We can't stop all of our stress responses, all right? What we can do is minimize the damage. So on a case like this, yeah, I'm going to have a hard time falling to sleep, but maybe I can use some of these tools so that I get 5 hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep, or even get 5 hours of sleep rather than 2 hours of sleep, right? So it's important to just realize that we can't stop all of those tools. I mean, we can't stop all of those stress responses that we have. So that's quite simply step 2, becoming a stress detective. So that brings us on to step 3, which is to start using the right tools. So here's my question. What will take out Superman faster than a speeding bullet? You're right, kryptonite. Well, I want to introduce you to what I call stress kryptonite. And stress kryptonite is pretty amazing. So here's what happens. When we get stressed out, all right, our brain and our body produces a whole lot of neurotransmitters. One of the most important that affects our overall health the most can be cortisol. And what stress kryptonite can do is, when you use it, it can help neutralize that response and neutralize the cortisol. So it's pretty incredible. Just like it could take out Superman, it could take out the stress response. So what is it? It's simply oxygen. All right. So I want to invite you to do this test with me. I want you to put one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach. Now, only do this if it is okay, all right? If you're, somewhere where you have to have hands somewhere and be safe, don't do it. But what I want you to do is I want you to concentrate and pay attention to which hand moves. We're going to take a couple breaths, all right? So I want to count to 3, and I want you to take a breath, and I want you to notice which hand moves. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, breathe. Okay, now we're going to do that again, just in case you're not sure. So 1, 2, 3, breathe. So what you notice? Here's the thing. If this hand move, that won't work for stress kryptonite. However, if this hand moves, that will work. All right? And let me explain why. By the way, had you ever heard that belly breathing and yoga breathing, or why do you think they teach pregnant women, diaphragmatic breathing when they're giving birth, right? Because the power is in the breath. And here is exactly why all of those things work. Because in our lungs, we have, at the very bottom of our lungs is where the most oxygen will get into our bloodstream, all right? So I call it the loading dock, because it's where our blood, our oxygen is loaded into our bloodstream. So when you hear this thing about breathing, whether it be yoga or, deep breathing being good for your health, it's because we're getting a good supply down to the bottom of our lungs. Now, that makes a difference because as that blood circulates, it gets throughout your body, and equally as important when you're dealing with stress, it gets to your brain. So you're getting more oxygen up to your brain to sort of neutralize that fight or flight kind of response. It's kind of like this, right? You got a big truck, it's backed up to the loading dock. They're going to get a lot of stuff very effectively and efficiently off of that truck. But imagine what happens if the truck parks this far away. So when we're breathing from the top of our chest, we're not getting nearly the amount of oxygen in that we can. So we're going to try this again, but this time I want you to concentrate on trying to make the hand on your belly move. All right. So we're going to do again a count of 3. And I want you, instead of sucking in your gut, what I basically want you to do is kind of make your pants fit you a little tighter at the moment. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, breathe. All right. We're going to do that again. All right. So you want the hand on your belly. You want the air to try and go to the bottom of your lungs. You ready? 1, 2, 3, breathe. Great. Now, here's the thing. If it didn't work, don't panic. Truth be told, I was teaching my for some reason I can't talk today. I was teaching my patients belly breathing, but I wasn't doing it myself until I discovered that this was the whole reason why you want to do belly breathing and how powerful of a stress tool that it could be. So I kind of had to start practicing. Now my theory is, well, let me ask you a question. Have you ever watched a baby breathe, right? Well, what moves? Their bellies. So the amazing thing is that we were all born belly breathers. Somewhere along the way, we lost it. I happen to have a theory that it's when we wanted our clothes to fit us a little bit better or a little looser or not so tight that we started sucking all the air up into our chest. But that's just my theory, all right? But here's how you can also teach kids to do. And there are a lot of classrooms across the country that are putting mindfulness practices into classrooms. And this is what they'll do. They'll have the kids do 2 minutes of mindfulness breathing. And you put your favorite stuffed animal up there and you can kind of do that. Now, most important point here is that you got to practice it. That is my default way for breathing. but it wasn't before. It wasn't until I just practiced and it became my kind of second nature to do more belly breathing now. Or think of it this way, it's really helping you get back to your first nature, which is how we were all born, right? So another right tool I want to tell you about is one I call dump and destroy. Now, this is one of those great tools. Remember I was telling you about sleep? If you can't fall asleep or you're waking up at night. But first, let me tell you what the tool is. It's really simple. What it is you take a piece of paper and something to write with. You write whatever it is, all right? You don't read what you just wrote, and then you destroy it. So here's the point of this. It's very different than journaling, all right? It's journaling, you write to read it later. Dump and destroy, or my other way I prefer to think of it as, is doing a brain dump, all right? Because what happens is the feelings have kind of gotten, the stress is piled up to here, and this way I can just write it and let it out. What happens if you read it is that you reload it. So I wanted to share with you a couple ways, little fun ways that you can do it. And then I'll tell you how you can use this for sleep. So my patients, we would actually make a dump box. And I have one right now because that is something that I've tried to do every day especially since I started chemo back in January. And so you can see, here's my little dump box. And what I do is I just take little pieces, scrap pieces of paper, I write on them, and when I'm done, I actually put in here. And then eventually I just take them all and I put them into my shredder and I destroy them. Another tool though could be a shredder, right? If you want to just get rid of it immediately, be my guest. I actually use this as a great tool. It's a great work tool. So when you do get back to work, so that you don't bring the stress of work home with you, what I would do is every day before I left work, I'd take 1 minute or 2 minutes and just, if it was a really crappy day or the new doctor I was working with was just really pissing me off, I would write it, and then before I left, I would shred it in our office shredder. So that way, and it did two things. It did, I noticed. One, I didn't take it home with me, all right, and two, when I came back to work the next day, I didn't bring all of that stress from the day before back with me to just pile it on even higher, all right? So how to use this technique for sleep? You do it the exact same way, but there's one difference. You cannot write in the room that you sleep. So what you have to do is get up, go into another room, all right? I go to my kitchen right near my stove, and if you go to bed tonight, and your mind is just racing and you can't get it to shut off, I want you to get up, go get a piece of paper in another room, start writing, just say, Carol told me to just start writing this and whatever it is, and I'm feeling, or you can start off just saying, I'm feeling this, or write whatever's coming up in your head for you, okay, that's keeping you from going to sleep. But here's the thing, don't read it, you write it, leave it there, and then go back and lay down, all right? Now, if it's a lot, you might need to repeat it, so you might need to do that a couple times. Or here's the other thing. Sometimes what keeps us awake at night isn't the stress of today, but it's the stress of tomorrow, and we don't want to forget things. So it works the same way. You get up, you go, you write it down. Now, here's the difference. When you wake up the next morning, all right, if it's something that you didn't want to forget, you destroy it without reading it. But if it's something that you wanted to remember for today, like you have the kid's doctor's appointment, or you want to make sure that you did this at work or that at work, what you do is you have it, and there you have it. So you didn't forget it, but you could also get to sleep at night. And the same thing happens if you wake up in the middle of the night and this whole process starts and your mind just starts racing on you. Get up, get out of bed, and go into another room. Then there's one other version of this tool I want to teach you, which happens to be my favorite. I call it the disappearing dump. All right. First, let me tell you how I came up with it. When I was working in Trenton, I had a gentleman living in transitional housing, meaning that he had roommates for the first time in his life. He had been in his own apartment. He'd always lived alone, and his roommates were stressing him out. And when he got stressed out, he would get angry. And when he got angry, he would start to tell him off. And I said to him, listen, instead of letting it get to that point, why don't you just do the dump and destroy? And he said, Carol, I'm afraid that somebody's going to try and read it. So I had to think real quick, real quick, real quick. So I was standing in front of my desk. I reached for this and I said, here, take this Sharpie. I want you to go into the bathroom. I want you to write on the Sharpie. You can just write, well, go F yourselves or whatever it is that you would say to their face. Just dump it on the paper, because here's the problem. He was getting ready to be kicked out because of his behavior, right? And then once you write it, you put it in the toilet and you flush it and you go, bloop. Now, here's the reason that this is my favorite, right? One, nobody will ever, ever, ever read whatever it was you wrote. And nobody's going to know what you're doing because you're in the bathroom. For most time, people think you're just going to the bathroom, right? But the other thing is, when your brain starts to go back to whatever it was that was stressing you out, kind of like in his case, these guys and them just being kind of shitheads, you know, he could just picture the going down, just kind of, and honestly, that's why I use the dump box. Because here's the thing, just because we're letting out some of the stress doesn't mean that our brain isn't still going to want to go back to it, all right? But when I put this in my box, what happens is whatever I was stressing me out that I wrote about, I actually don't think about that thing, but I picture the box instead. I picture it being in the box. So the visual overrides the actual thought, if that makes sense to y'all. So again, I call this the disappearing dump because you'd use toilet paper and a Sharpie and then you flush it and nobody ever reads what it is. So there's a couple important points for this tool. One is that you have to use paper. You can't use your computer. You can't use your phone. You actually, because here's the thing, this is the release. It's the writing it, right? It's got to be paper and then some kind of writing utensil. It doesn't matter if it's a marker or a crayon or chalk, honestly. It doesn't matter. Most important point two, don't read it. And then you, like I said, you might need to repeat it a couple times because the feelings might be all the way up to here. So it might take you a couple times to get it back down to here. All right. So I got another right tool for you. And this one I had to learn 30 years ago when I started working in the hospital. And that was how to say no without saying no. Much less stress doing it this way. All right. Let me tell you the backstory real quick. So when I first started working in a behavioral health unit, I couldn't even give people change for a quarter. And the reason was because patients could say that I had cheated them, right? I mean, they could really kind of twist it completely around. And so they were very strict about, you know, what I could say, what I could do. And so I had to come up with a way. And the way I found, especially with somebody asking me for something that I couldn't do or give them, was to say this, you know what? I wish I could. And then I would tell them why, you know, in this case, I'd say, you know, the hospital rules don't let me. In other cases, what I might say is, I wish I could. Now's just not a very good time. But here's the thing. If people ask you something and you don't want to say yes and you don't think you can say no, this is really quick. You could just say, I'll get back to you. And they'll say, well, Carol, could you take me to the store? I'll get back to you. Well, could you do this? I'll get back to you. I said, I promise I'll get back to you. Now, here's the point. Do you need to follow up on it later? Yes. Are they going to ask you again later? Yes. But the trick is that you don't make more stress in the moment by saying yes when you know that you really don't want to do that. Okay? All right. So that's the simple one. Same kind of thing. You got to practice this. Otherwise, it will not come out of your mouth very easily. And I have one more right tool for you. And that is the tool that JFK used during his presidency. in the White House. And no, it is not Marilyn Monroe. Oh my goodness. When I'm sharing these, this information and doing this with the younger group, they have no clue, kind of why I'm talking and joking about Marilyn Monroe. But the real tool that he had was a rocker. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I listened to this great education program on Nightingale Conant by Nick Hall, who's a psychoneuroimmunologist. In fact, he was one of the first researchers to show that guided imagery could have a positive impact on breast cancer survivors. And what he was describing was the rocking chair and how when our brains move in this, front to back motion, right? And there's a certain degree to it, it creates a physiological response in our body, right? Which is why babies, when you rock them, will fall asleep. And I had this aha moment because I had an Uncle Tony. He passed away, but when I came here to New Jersey 30 years ago to take care of my mom, my Uncle Tony lived in a group home and he was on the autism spectrum. And, we would take him out to Larry's Diner in Vineland, New Jersey, and we'd get there waiting for our table. And all of a sudden, my uncle would start doing his rocking, which I'm not going to do because I'm sensitive to motion. But he would just, kind of start moving back and forth and back and forth. My mom would turn around and say, Tony. Of course, he'd stop. As soon as she turned back around, he'd be doing it again. But it occurred to me that anybody on that autism spectrum, when they're rocking, that's what they're doing. It is a relaxing. It's the only one way that they've discovered that they could calm themselves down, right? Now, the interesting part about it, in the last couple of years, rockers have been showing up more places. We put them in the hospital. Here on the East Coast, they have them in some airports, which is really good because, as you're traveling and stressed out on your trip, you can take a little bit of time to go in a rocker and it's free, not like the massages that are there in that. And besides, but anyways, so here's the other place though. Think of a restaurant that has them outside for sale. Well, yep, Cracker Barrel. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think they're outside for sale. Mostly is I think they're out there so that people don't get stressed out and leave. And the other thing that's dangerous about that store, that if you have to wait 30 minutes for a table, guess what else they have? The store so that you can go impulse shopping because you're stressed out, right? It's all set up to get us. Anyways, I have been known when I didn't have a rocker to actually do rocking just like my Uncle Tony. I had a girlfriend give me tickets to Cher concert last spring. And we were outside waiting for about 30 minutes and there was just so many people and a lot of people stressed me out. And so I just started rocking, standing there, rocking right back. And sure enough, could throw my body back into that relaxation response. So we got number 3, start using the right tools. We got stress kryptonite, we got dump and destroy you can do, we got saying no, and we got rocking, all right? I want to just review. These are the 3 steps again. You got to stop using the wrong tools, you got to become a stress detective, and you got to start using the right tools. Make sense? So if you have any questions about that, go ahead, put them in your Facebook, put them in the comments there. Go ahead, put them in the Q&A if you're on Zoom with me, and we'll take a look at them before we wrap things up, all right? So I want to move on now to how 60-second solutions work. And we kind of talked about this earlier, right? You shake up a bottle of root beer and the pressure builds up inside. In fact, let me just show you that pressure has gone nowhere, and the foam, you can still see that foam is still there, right? And I remember I told you that people are the same as root beer bottle. Life happens to us. We get shook up, shakes us up, and the pressure builds up inside of us until it builds and builds and builds. And there's 2 critical points. One, it doesn't go anywhere on its own. It didn't magically go away while it was sitting there. I could put it in the refrigerator. It's not going to go away. And the other thing is it will stay there until we release it, or in the case of us human beings, we either explode or we implode. Well, it turns out it's the same with stress. And that is the secret to 60-second solutions. Now, I have tuck tape on these. I don't know if you guys can see it because I have used them in workshops and people have opened them up. So I learned to duct tape it so that the person next to them didn't get an accidental shower. So I'm not going to be able to open these bottles, but if I had another bottle here and I open it, right, that's what we got to do with stress. And what's the safest way to do that with a bottle? Yeah, it's to let a little bit out at a time, right? So you're just going, because if you've ever tried to let the pressure out of a bottle of carbonated beverage, whether it's seltzer or root beer, you know that if you go slow and you try and time it, you're still going to end up with a mess. So we're doing until it's out. Well, here's the thing. That's how 60-second solutions work, because what we're doing is we're letting a little stress out at a time. All right. And I said earlier, if you only got 30 seconds is better than none whatsoever. So here's the secret weapon I discovered. I call it the stressometry do 60 system. And if you follow this system, it will work. This is what I use to get rid of my migraines. All right. So there's step one. What step one means is you got to stop the level from rising. So in the case of you want to stop the pressure from building up, or I like to think of a tub, right? Because if you turn the water on, the level's going to rise. You got to shut the water off. Otherwise, it still will eventually overflow. So that's what we do with step one. We do something to stop the level from building or the level from rising. But then you must do step two, and that is something active so that it releases what's there. Just like with the soda bottle and having to go, we can't just wish it gone. We actually have to take action to let a little bit of it out. And in the case of the tub, you got to take action, to release some of the water that's already in the tub, right? So I want you to understand this, because see, sometimes stress management will say, just listen to music, all right, or count to 10, or do this. But that's why stress management isn't enough, and why we need to practice stressometry. So stop is something passive, meaning no energy needed, or the other word I like to use for it is calming, right? Whereas active, dumping it and releasing it is something that's actually active. So here's some examples. If you look at this list, all of the things under stop are actually very passive activities. They don't require muscle and they don't really require energy, okay? If I'm listening to music, it's just something that I'm going through the motions, so to speak. However, when you look at the active side, you can see that everything on this side requires you to use energy, and it requires muscles at the same time. Now, if you're somebody who's ever been an avid exerciser and for some reason you miss a day with your exercise, you probably like me where you feel like a little weird. Well, that's because anytime we're exercising, we're kind of going and letting a little bit out of our stress pressure cooker. All right. Now, here's the key to making the system work. You must do step one before you do step two. And you must do step one and you must do step two. Otherwise, if you just sit and listen to music, that isn't going to help you as much as if you sit and listen to music and you do jumping jacks. And I want to come back to this slide just a minute, because here's the other thing I want you to understand. Exercise doesn't mean always exercise. So I had lots of patients who, you know what, couldn't get to the gym, didn't have the financial resources to get to a gym, maybe couldn't go walk outside because it wasn't safe in their neighborhood. So what I would do is have them walk in place or do jumping jacks for 60 seconds or do push-ups or do sit-ups for 60 seconds. But it's anything that requires muscles, even imaginary jump rope, right? Because you're using muscles and it's creating that release. So even if you're somewhere where you can't get out of the house, you could still find ways to create that release. All right. So here's the quick 3. You always have these with you, so you always have the ability to stop the level from rising. We talked about breathing. Self-talk is really important, all right? And it's just saying something positive to yourself. So if I'm running late for work and I get stuck behind this person, it's really slow, right? And just starting to stress me out. What I will say to myself is, Carol, you have all the time that you need. You know, you are, you are where you are. You're going to get there with all the time that you need. And it's a way of kind of counteracting that negative self-talk that the stress is usually kind of triggering. And then, of course, the serenity prayer. I can say this out loud or I could say it in my head. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this is one I use with my cancer all the time. You know, there's a lot that I can't control. I can't control whether or not I have hair, right? You know, but what I did do back in the day was I actually trimmed it off myself because I could. That's what I can't do. And then you got to have the quick 3 to release. So these are 3 that you always have with you. Again, the walk could be doing jumping jacks or sit-ups or anything like that. The talking, you can have somebody, call somebody. Now, here's the thing. Texting doesn't work the same way. You got to actually use your mouth as the release. And if you don't have somebody to talk to, use the empty chair method. I have told off plenty of bosses in my life without ever seeing them face to face. Because here's the thing, if the feeling's up to here and I opened up my mouth, I would say things to my boss that I wouldn't be able to take back because between here and here, comes out. So if I would use these tools, I'd go in my office, I would curse at him, I could do whatever I say I wanted to, call him whatever I wanted to. What would happen is, and of course I would do that after listening to some calming music in my office, I would get the level to go down to here, and then I could go talk to him. But if the level was up here, I couldn't talk. Make sense? And then, of course, the dump and destroy. Again, just reminding you, that's when you write it, you don't read it, and you destroy it. So these are 5 tools that I use every day since my cancer diagnosis, because quite honestly, my life turned upside down back in October. You know, the rest of America's life has started to turn upside down in March, right? But these are the 5 tools I use every day to help me take control of the stress that cancer has brought into my life. Exercise. There are some days that I can only do 2 minutes. And if that's all I can do, that's all I do. But I try every day to at least do a little bit. My punching bag. I have one here at home. I actually used to have my patients make one out of old pillowcases and some rope and just shove some old clothes in it and then, use the rope and a nail and just kind of tie it in between the door. Meditation is another thing that I'll do. And actually I have time, so I want to share with you all this. I used to think I could never meditate because my mind would not be quiet. And then I had a girlfriend who I saw it change her life. She was a type A person and became a type C person, calm. So I went with her to her meditation center. Her teacher knew I'd never meditated, and her teacher ran the center, was a Tibetan nun named Tame. And Tame knew that I'd never meditated, and there was a couple other people there that had never done. And so she said, okay, I'm going to give you my simple instructions. Sit down and shut up. And I was like, oh, I can do that. I guess I can meditate. And so she gave us this technique. And what she said you could do is as you breathe in, you think to yourself, my mind is calm. And as you exhale, you're saying to yourself, my body's relaxed. And so here, if it's safe for you to do this, I love to do this in a workshop just so people can experience this. So I want to ask you to join me. We'll do just, like 30 seconds. All right. Actually, let me get we'll kind of get my little, right? So here's what we're going to do. I want you just to either close your eyes, but if that's not comfortable for you, I want you just to look down then, all right? So you can just kind of look down at the floor. And I'll guide you through some of them, and then I'll be quiet, and I want you to just continue it on your own, all right? So when we breathe in, we're going to think to ourselves, my mind is calm, and then we're going to say, my body's relaxed. You ready? Let's start. Breathe in, my mind is calm. Breathe out, my body's relaxed. In, my mind is calm. Out, my body's relaxed. Come on back. Actually, I lied. That was 45 seconds, just about. Now, I started doing that for 1 minute after I learned that from Tame. And the amazing part was that in 2 weeks later, my dog got out, and I would have been the person freaking out, right? Because it's 9 o'clock at night, it's dark, I live in the woods, there are bears around here and all sorts of other animals. But instead, I was so eerily calm. So here's my encouragement. Even if you just do this for 1 minute a day, I promise you, you will feel the difference. Because here's what meditation does. It takes our reaction idols and it lowers them. Almost like the idle in your car, right? You start your car in the morning and the engine idles a little faster, but you let it warm up and it kind of goes down. Well, actually, that's with gasoline. I don't know about electric cars. But what happens is, and what happened to me with Sandy getting out was, instead of my idle being up here and me reacting, my idle was lower so that I didn't overreact to it. So that's one of the other tools I use every day. I also use laughter yoga every day. I do 20 minutes of a laughter meditation. And if you don't know what laughter yoga is, YouTube it. Look for a gentleman by the name of Dr. Katari, but there's some other really great ones out there. And there's some people doing Zoom laughter yogas now because we can't do them live, right? And then, of course, my dump and destroy. Now, here's the thing. I use these 5 tools every day, regardless of whether I think I got stress or I don't have stress. See, this way I'm in control of the stress rather than the stress having to be in control of me before I use them, if that makes sense. And I created a little tool that helps me. I made a checklist that I put on my refrigerator. Now, I started chemo on January 30th. And so you can see the month of February, there's some gaps, all right? The problem with the laughter yoga is I like to do it in my car, and my sister was here with me for just about 2 weeks. And so I didn't get comfortable doing it somewhere else. Now I do it somewhere else. If I'm playing with my dogs, I'll be out there aside doing it with them. But here's the idea. Here's March. And the whole goal of this is just to help you get better at using these tools. It's a little bit of accountability and a little bit of practice. And I look forward to just being able to put a check mark there every day. Like, okay, sure, went and did it. All right. So something simple as a checklist is a great way to go, helping you take control of the new tools. So let's look real quick at what we've covered. I've kind of looked at why stress management won't work by itself. And that is because there are 2 sides to stress management, just like a coin. There's the prevention side, and then there's the intervention side, which is what I teach, stressometry. We talked about the 3 steps that you must take if you want to have success controlling stress. Step 1, stop using the wrong tools. Step 2, become a stress detective. And step 3 is to start using the right tools. Then we looked at what that impact could be, right? And either you're not sleeping or it's spilling out on people, or maybe anxiety or depression, or the littlest things are starting to get to you, or your health is starting to be compromised. And then we finished kind of up more with the right tools, and that is stress kryptonite, which is the belly breathing, the dump and destroy, the I'll get back to you, and also the rocking. And lastly, we talked about the do 60 system and how 60-second solutions work. You have to do step 1, you have to do step 2 after you do step 1. Step 1 is something passive or calming, and step 2 is something that is active and requires energy and muscles. And again, if you only got 30 seconds is better than none. So I have a surprise for you, because if you were to go to my website, stressuniversity.com, I offer people a chance to learn some of the tools. I honestly believe that that's why my life has gone the way it has, so that I could take what I've learned and share it with people. So if you want some more stress tools than what I've shared with you here, I have a fast start training. There's no obligation, you're not going to get charged anything. It's just a way of being able to give people some of the tools that, see, my dream was always to take what I've taught in hospitals for 30 years, because I thought everybody needed to use it, right? And so this is my way of being able to help people that would never, ever be in any of my groups, to learn some of the tools that I have. Plus, I could stay on here and talk for hours and hours and hours. But I know people don't have all of that time. So it becomes another way of packaging some learning so that you can have that. So a little bit about what it is. So it's 2 modules. Module 1 is you kind of will identify your stress sources. You learn what are stress bullseyes and how to protect yours. And then I also teach you the ultimate stress tool. And then module 2 is we look at avoiding overload, why walking away from somebody won't work, surviving stress quakes, and lastly, assessing kind of where your mastery skills are. So it's yours, it's free. You can watch it on your phone, on your iPad, on any device. You want to go to Stress University and then /stress-tools-sign up. All right, and I'll give you that URL in a second again, but here's what you do. If you got it right, this is where you'd show up. You would put in your name, your real email, you click off that you're not a robot, and then you get taken to congratulations, you're in, telling you to check your email. Now, gotta give it just a little, give the email a little while to get there. The internet is pretty backed up these days, all right? You'll get the email that will look like this. You will simply click that red button and it will take you to this. And then you can earmark it or bookmark it in your computer. Earmark it, sorry about that. So you want to bookmark it, but it'll take you, this is module 1. You click on one of those different sessions right there and it takes you to this. So you can see here, I just picked module 1, session 3, what is a stress bullseye? So the videos are all 5 to 10 minutes, nothing longer than 10 minutes. And some of them actually have action sheets. So if you click on that little red button, there'll be, when there's buttons there, that's for you to click on because there's something for you to print out, all right? And then that takes you to like this example of the action sheet, which is helping you kind of identify more of those stress responses, all right? So you can get more tools if you want them. You just go to Stress U. So this one I highlighted, it's YOU, university.com, and it'd be /stress-tools-sign up. So, you know what? I actually I actually took a little bit longer than what I wanted to. I apologize for that. So here's what I'm going to do about the questions. If you have submitted them to me over Zoom, I will email you the list of questions and the answers. If you are watching me live on Facebook or on a recording, you can go ahead, put your question in the comment section, and I promise that I will get you your answer. And then this way I can put them all here so we can all get the answers to everybody's questions, okay? So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. If you have a question, you can always reach me at carol@stressuniversity.com. I'm happy to be of help. I was excited to be able to do this program with everybody today because this is the first little bit of giving back that I've been able to do, and not being able to work at the hospital and to be able, to kind of support my coworkers there, and be able to kind of just give back. So I thank you so much for joining me. And again, if you got any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. All right. And I hope that this has really been helpful and that you will use the tools that we've kind of talked about and the systems we talked about today. So thanks so much.